Plastique is a type of carving that one does to form birds, fish, animals, humans, and plants of all sizes and shapes, from jewelry-sized pieces up to very large sculptures and objects. It is a skill where one carves several different pieces of gem material, tongue and grooves. Then these separate pieces interlock with one another and glued to form a whole sculpture. This style of carving was highly developed and refined during the Fabergé era. One can look back over 120 years ago in the gem art books on Fabergé and see human miniature replicas of men smoking pipes, dressed in shirts, trousers, heavy jackets with folds in the fabric, hats on heads that are all composed of several different varieties of gemstone material. I later came to be told that many of Fabergé's works of art were carved in this very valley, and in all cases, if not most, credit was never given for the craftsmanship. I'm totally enthralled and blown away by his work and art. Here in Bernard's showroom were huge eagles with wingspans over 2 or 3 feet in their spread, done in clear rock quartz crystal, lapis, and even cabochon grade ruby. So amazingly real was his art. I must admit, I was totally overwhelmed and blown away. All of a sudden, I realized I had so much to learn, even after my 10 years working alone and in obscurity. My art up to this point paled in comparison. They did ask to see my few samples. Somewhat embarrassed, I pulled out my pieces to share. The next thing I knew, Bernard asked me, "How did you get such a high level of water-clear polish on your pieces, and especially in the large quartz crystal?" He seemed very impressed to know that I was self-taught and that I could have come to achieve this level and degree of mastery without a teacher. I never did get to see his workshop that day because, like almost all studios in Adar, back then the doors were closed to all outsiders. One generally only gets as far as the showrooms. But we exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. From this point on, the doors to some of Adar's finest began to open, one master at a time. Bernard, as we're getting ready to leave, says he knows someone whom I should meet and would really enjoy seeing my work. The dream is unfolding right in front of my eyes. He's on the phone to a friend who is world-renowned at that time for cutting some of, if not the largest gemstone spheres in the world. His name is Didier Jerusalem, and his showroom and factory are way out in the outskirts of Adar. Again, I would have never found his place without an introduction and direction if it was not for Bernard and his wife. With directions in hand, we are now traveling through thick forests and rolling green hills in the backcountry of Adar Oberstein to a small hamlet called Heerstein. As we enter this huge showroom filled with gemstone spheres of all types of material and literally all sizes, we meet his wife, Alyssa. We are sharing our story with her, and I pull out my few pieces once again. The next thing I know, she says to us, "Wait here. My husband needs to see this." I am continuing to be blown away at every turn on my first day in Adar. He comes running out and with excitement. I find out that he is a 7th generation gemstone cutter of his family. He even mentions that his family goes back as far as the Crusades in the 11th century, thus the last name Jerusalem. He appears to be impressed that he is meeting a completely novel and unique individual who was self-taught and has achieved this level completely on my own. I later have come to realize this was so outside the box for these masters, since almost all of them spend years of study in their school and under the guidance of a master. How could this kid from America without any formal training achieve what I have accomplished on my own? He was also totally impressed by my water-clear polish. I have come to see that my polish was much higher and scratch-free from what almost all of them had been taught and how to get a polish on a stone. I came to realize I knew something that they didn't, and that they were extremely curious to know my secrets. I would come to learn that my self-taught discoveries in certain techniques working outside the box would be my greatest asset that allowed me to meet these masters. They wanted to know what I knew, and likewise, I was so curious to know what they knew and what type of equipment they used. Upon the short but intense interchange, he says, "There is someone I would like for you to meet. His name is Bernd Munstenier." Are you kidding me? I knew of him from a few years back during my gemology studies at GIA. He was the one back then who broke the mold of tradition and did completely novel and unique faceted and carved abstract gemstones in very rare transparent materials. He has been called the grandfather of fantasy cut gemstones. You might say he invented the concept and has inspired numerous others both in Adar and the USA in this form of technique with transparent gem material. At the time he started this concept of cutting in the valley, he was ridiculed and criticized for his new style of cutting. 10 years my senior and equipped with a complete training in lapidary skills, he ventured off to invent and create what would be a whole new style of cutting the world had never seen before. Here I was on my first day in Adar Oberstein, going from one master's workshop to another. It was so magical, like a dream, but in my full waking state. The climax of this first day in Adar was to meet someone I had truly admired and looked up to in this art field. I could not have imagined that morning when I awoke that I would be standing in his studio showroom by the day's end. Stuff like this is almost fairy tale-like. A master in Adar letting in a complete stranger who had not gone through the rigorous training at the Fachschule Edelstein was completely unheard of in the Valley of Adar in those days. Technically speaking, an individual of German origin in Adar had to go through the training in this school to then be able to work alongside a master. I was completely unheard of in the Valley of Adar in those days, or ever before then, to let a foreigner who had not gone through this training. He tells me there will be no way I would be able to find his studio, so he graciously offers to have me follow his car as we drive further into the countryside to an even smaller village way in the middle of nowhere. And this tiny village at the end of the road is Bernd Munstenier's studio and showroom. His home lies 20 feet behind his studio showroom. I had a great time admiring his mastery and completely unique gem art. He is a living legend, and here I am sitting down and having a conversation with him. He is, in my opinion, one individual who has changed the course of gemstone fantasy style the world over. We have remained friends over the years, meeting at trade shows, speaking at the same conferences, and sharing dinners together. He is now retired, but his son Tom is carrying on the tradition of the family name. This was my first day in Adar, and I got to meet 3 very different types of lapidary gem artists. It would be a true highlight in my life, one I will never forget, and that led to a door that would have never opened to me had I not come to Adar and met Claire in her guest house in Oberstein. Upon our return from our European tour, I received an invitation from Bernard Becker to come back to Adar and work in his studio. I could not believe this at first. Remember, on that very first day in Adar, no one was willing to take me into their workshop. That first trip, I never got to see their equipment and observe them working. The doors were closed, and I only got to meet each of them in their showrooms. He literally had to write me back again and tell me, yes, I would like for you to come back and spend time in my workshop. This was a golden opportunity I could not pass up. The following year, I made my way back to Adar and spent 2 weeks in his studio. There I got to see and work on the equipment, learn their tooling and many of their techniques. I have been told by several reliable sources from Adar and who know the Valley tradition that I was most likely the only foreigner at that time, certainly the only American ever to be allowed to work in the studio of a trained master. Every year after that, I would return for 2 weeks and work alongside Bernard. I learned techniques that might have taken me years to figure out and master. I was now on the fast track in my training that continued for another 5 years. I was also introduced to the equipment and tools that I quickly brought and exported back to the US to employ in my studio. As our friendship grew, I returned year after year for 2 weeks at a time.